Hello, I'm Tom Ferguson and welcome to The Fundamental Molecule. This show explores the intersection of water, technology, and entrepreneurship. Each week, I interview innovators, experts, entrepreneurs, and investors in the world of water, helping us understand where this trillion-dollar industry is headed. These are the stories of the people building the future of the world's most valuable and fundamental resource.
Disclaimer. Tom Ferguson is the managing partner of Virgin Island Ventures. All opinions expressed by Tom and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Virgin Island Ventures. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be viewed as investment advice or relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.
Taking the reins at a company is no small thing, especially when your predecessor in the CEO role was someone as exceptional as Julie Mullen. Julie had built the basis for Aclarity, and following her was not for the faint of heart. Mike Shaw is not faint of heart. He is an exceptional technical and product leader with fascinating experiences at Evoqua and Nanostone, and he has been leading the development of the Aclarity product up to its first commercial deployments late last year. Now officially in the CEO role, congratulations, Mike. I wanted to hear how he reflected on his journey, transition from a technical leader to a company leader, and talk about the development of the PFAS market, among many other things, including a certain Manchester United manager. Please enjoy my conversation with the CEO of Aclarity, Mike Shaw. Mike Shaw, how terribly nice to see you.
It is a pleasure to see you too, Tom. It's great to be here.
Excellent, excellent. Obviously, we've had some great news about you ascending to being the new CEO of Aclarity. You've sort of been doing the job for some time now, but I'm really curious. I'm excited for this conversation because I think that you have a point of view that we've really never had before, which is, somebody who is occupying a very defined role on the team and then ascending to being the principal decision maker for a company. And I think the best way of getting it to the heart of this is to ask, what do you think that technical people least understand about the business side of a company, and vice versa? What do you think that the business people least understand about the technical side of a company?
It's so easy for both technical folks and commercial folks to get buried in their work and in their silos and start to lose a little bit of connection to what their work is really aimed at doing. On the technical side, it doesn't happen all the time, but in many cases, you can start to see technologists start to drift away from the problem. And sometimes it can be slight. Lose a little bit of connection with what the actual problem is and how your solution is aimed at solving it. And you can end up, it's like that. You got a long boat ride and a tiny little mistake in direction can all of a sudden put you down a path that you no longer have the solution anymore. I see that happen so often. On the commercial side, similarly, usually there's a pretty good alignment. Okay, our product or solution does this, and I'm going to go find those customers. But no customer's problem is always identical, right? And so a lot of times you find commercial folks are trying to force solutions into places where they don't fully understand how it might navigate and work out. And that can be a problem too. Usually that manifests itself in distractions, right? You've got the organization working on things where it may not really be in the right place. It's going to come through later. The customer is going to know this isn't the right solution. We will eventually know it's not the right solution. And you've wasted time if you haven't discovered that early. So in both cases, I think if your organization is large enough, having a product management type function to keep those lines from getting crossed. But in the absence of that, good communication and also good techno-economic evaluation, constantly checking your hypothesis, constantly checking your solution versus the customer's problem, because it will evolve in various different ways. You've got to just be disciplined, keep checking that, and make sure you don't get off course.
So what does good techno-economic evaluation look like? Can you just explain for the audience exactly what it is and why it's important? And then you can go on to what the best version of it looks like.
At its simplest form, it's measuring a customer problem and it's checking the solution's ability to address it, but from ultimately a cost and value perspective. It gets tricky because you got to try to make sure you capture every element. And I've been working on this now for some time and I've done it wrong every way you can, right? And you miss, important pieces and you go into a conversation with a customer thinking you've got the answer and you learn very quickly you forgot the main point, and
There's a very large line item we need to include.
yes. So, it does evolve over time, but it's trying to get all the elements of the customer's process problem. It may not even be necessarily a problem that they know about. It could just be that there's a great opportunity there that's hard to see through all the different noise. And so when it's done well, you capture the full process that the customer has. You have to do a really honest assessment of your own solution. People have a bias toward their own solution and sometimes can start to try to give themselves an advantage when they're doing the analysis. That doesn't help anybody. It will come true in the end, right? You've got to be honest, objective. You've got to be honest, objective about what the competition is. And sometimes the competition is either conventional or the competition is do nothing. So you've got to make sure you fully assess all those things, honestly evaluate your product where it is now, but also you should be optimistic and think about where it can go. And then you can really start to form a strategy around how you can solve a customer's problem. Sometimes the right answer is, this isn't our problem. We're not going to be able to help them economically versus the other options they have. That's okay. Customers appreciate that. The next time they come back to you and you give them an answer where you do think it'll win, they'll trust you because you were honest the first time. That's a fun conversation to have. That's a good tool to make sure you get good alignment on the product market fit from as early as possible a time as you can. And again, you got to keep going back to it, keep refining it, keep testing your assumptions.
And how do you, because you're exactly right, of course you are. But for people who are operating on, for example, sales teams, the incentive structures are driving you in a very specific direction, which is sell more as soon as possible and at large volume as possible in order to hit number, which is usually quite challenging. And so to get people to have that kind of dispassionate assessment that you just articulated is non-trivial. How do you make sure that people who are operating under those kinds of, sales team incentive structures are actually acting as you just described?
It's really tricky. Sometimes it's too soon to have those structures in place, I've seen that before. You've got to be open, honest, transparent when you're working with folks, bringing them on. Again, if you bring someone on and sell them this incentive structure and you could have this top level growth and they come out blazing because they're incentivized, but they distract the organization, you set yourself back. I think you've got to find the right fit for the time that you're in. It makes sense to have incentive structures like that. Make sure you're transparent and open so that you guys are operating on the same team. You want to be working toward a good win for the organization. You want to be in front of customers where you've got a right to win. So you can have a higher probability and a better success rate for each engagement. It's just finding that balance.
Yeah, I guess we'll change the incentive structures, right? Exactly right. I know you've obviously really, really thought about this because where you end up, you've got to look after like future you first, like getting down the line with the sale where it's just, not going to be working out for the customer. It means that it's absolutely not working out for you. You also mentioned the product management side of things, which I think is one of the first times that we've had it mentioned on this, as the mode of alignment between the technical and the commercial sales teams. What have you learned that you think is worth passing on around about the art of product management? What do you think people should bear in mind as maybe they're looking at hiring their first people into this role?
So much has come through via osmosis. When I was at Evoqua and I was working in an innovation role and I worked directly with product management. And so juices flowed. It worked out really well. When I went to Nanostone, that position didn't exist until actually, and I know Mike Ahern from Steve. Mike Ahern made that role, put me into it. While I was at Evoqua, I thought, oh, that seems really cool because I always really wanted to be closer to the commercial side and doing this kind of value solutioning, et cetera. When I got into that role, I loved the influence I could have and I could get involved in product lifecycle and commercial scoping and strategy and so on. You got to make sure you've got shoes, there's a position to fill there. I think when I came to Aclarity, it probably wasn't the right time to go and hire a product manager.
No.
So instead, you're looking to have some of those functions covered by your people. It just so happened that I had that background, so it felt natural for you to come in. I think the main key is to really be constantly linking your technology development, your product development, your process development back to the customer problem. And initially, you may not know what your customer is. You may not know what the best problem for you to solve is. That is a journey for startups like us, right? So then, it's somebody that's working with commercial team, bring the information in, build out what the problem statement is, what the opportunities are, look across the solutions you're working on. I think that's the role you really want to have somebody who owns that. Whether they have the title product manager or not is beside the point. It's just you've got to make sure that you don't have these silos, technologists working in technology, and every once in a while they share what they're working on, and commercial people going and talking to customers, and every once in a while, hey, I've got a water for you to test. You're throwing darts at that point. You really want to try to use the limited resources you have and be really focused and strategic. And so you proactively make sure you're looking for those connections early.
It really strikes me that this is where people who have got, they're sort of often almost pejoratively referred to as soft skills, but people who can kind of communicate and like be nice and be somebody that, when you turn up with a request, that other people are okay to acquiesce to that request rather than telling them to sort it off.
Yeah, that's right.
Having those people who have the skills to be able to move between the two functions is such an interesting and I think underrated members of the team. But you're totally right that there's a time and a place. You can't put that in when your early stage, you're still zeroing in on both the technical, the problem side of things, because it's one of these things you can invest in later. But really, when the team is small, it's not really appropriate to hire too early.
We've seen it all go wrong, right? You have technologists working on a product and then they get there and they're like, all right, here's the product. Here's what it can do. Let's go find a customer. It's like,
Fools.
Too late.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll get lucky, but.
Exactly. It's like, hey, we've built a thing. Now let's go and find where it fits. That's really tricky. So you're now the CEO of Aclarity. You've taken the reins. You've sort of been acting in the role ever since the absolutely magnificent Julie, previous fundamental molecule guest, of course. She was at the helm when we invested in 2022. Just obviously got a daunting act to follow as she sort of put Aclarity into a really, really fascinating position. But can you just sort of walk us through the journey, kind of taking the reins? So starting from Julie's decision to move on to, as it turns out, really quite interesting opportunities. I've been following what she's done with massive interest. Just walk us through the journey that you went through from that point when sort of the board asked you to fill some fairly significant shoes. What does that process look like for you?
It was shocking at first, intimidating. I loved working for Julie. I learned so much from her. And when she decided to step down and the board approached me about this change, initially it was like, am I going to be able to do this? Can I pull this off? It just so happened though, right? We had a real focus at that time, digging deep technically, focusing on this technology, product development, finding that product market fit. And so the majority of the team was already reporting into me doing that work. And so I had great support from my board, of course. They were there with me. They guided me. I felt supported, and the mission really didn't need a big change or steer. So I took comfort in the fact that we're doing what we need to be doing. We had arrived there already. So we just continued that. What had to change, of course, is I had to take on the what comes next piece. But I've always loved that, and the roles I've had in the past, the people that I got a chance to work with that did that so well, I relished the opportunity to put into practice what I'd been observing and learning from all those folks. And it went from oh goodness, what am I going to do here to it's okay, I got this. Actually, I think I'm going to enjoy this. And it proved to be true. And now a lot of things had to go well, right? I had a great team in place. They all stepped up, and we've been on this fun, exhilarating journey, developing this new technology and finding that product market fit. And then, it doesn't always happen, but it worked, right? We made these advances in our product. We made these advances in our solutioning. We found good product market fit. And I had a team that was motivated and capable. So, it's funny, this past year has been the best year of my career by far. I have loved every minute of it. And so it's funny, the journey that it started off a little scary and has ended up, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me. It's wild.
That's awesome. And honestly, from the outside looking in, really the way in which you've gone about it really has been exemplary. The maintenance of the momentum being set up, obviously the quality of the team that was there, but for it to be as seamless as it was really something to behold. I'm curious, how do you see the difference between being an engineering leader and a company leader?
I guess it's obvious to say, but the breadth of responsibility grows. And while it's obvious to say, it just percolates everything. I knew when I came in and, I had experiences. So I knew when I got here, there was going to be a lot to do. I was coming in from a company that was at a further stage, a more mature stage. And there were all these lessons that I could bring. And I did so, and it went well. So I knew I had a big impact. But going into the new role, all of a sudden, you feel that responsibility. I've got all these folks that are working really hard and they're motivated. They're relying on me to help guide this company's success. We have very patient investor set that have been on this journey with us. They've put their trust in me. They've given me this opportunity, and I have a debt of responsibility to them. And of course, there's the problem that we're trying to solve. I'm very passionate about this too. And so I felt the responsibility. But, like I said before, it's funny how you find yourself in a new situation and then all of a sudden you find that you really take to it. So the weight of responsibility has been balanced with the fun that we've been having. I'm very lucky to be in a situation where I've got this supportive board of directors and investors. I've got this great, motivated, capable team. And so if it was ever going to work, it was going to work because of all these things in place,
But also, I don't know, you've got a really interesting toolkit. Maybe the best way of getting at this is to kind of rewind a little bit. I mean, you've referred to your experiences at Evoqua and Nanostone. You're obviously built for the role that you find yourself in, but everybody comes from somewhere. Everybody comes from a set of experiences. Take a few minutes to walk us through from all the way from, I believe it was Cambridge Isotope, right?
Yes, that's right.
So going through Cambridge Isotope, Evoqua, Nanostone, how do you approach that sequence of roles? Just walk us through the kind of gradation of your kind of key lessons coming out of each of those experiences, because they've set you up rather well, it seems.
It almost seems like it was planned, but it was so not planned.
All the best stories are.
Exactly. Well, I started at Cambridge Isotope. I graduated school and I was just desperate to have some money in my pocket. I took the first opportunity I could, and it was a role as a technician, but it was fun. I had a great time, and it wasn't long. I moved into the role of production chemist, doing all this small batch specialty chemical production. And basically you were an individual contributor, but running multiple projects. And so you're sequencing all the different projects you have. And that's why I really learned about organizational skills and the way that you sequence the different work that you're doing with the constraints that you have. And really loved it. Nobody was looking over my shoulder, giving me a plan. I sequenced everything I did. And so I really grew to have confidence in my ability to lay out a plan, organize it with, multiple competing efforts overlapping. It wasn't long though. I really never wanted to be a chemist. Funny, I have a degree in chemical engineering, but I really like the engineering part. I don't so much like the chemistry part. I really wanted to find a process engineering role, and I ended up landing the role with Evoqua. Of course, at the time, it was Siemens Water Technologies. And I went into this group that had developed and launched the Ion Pure continuous electrodeionization product line. And there were some amazing, prolific innovators there. Gary Ganzi, Anil Jha, Li Liang, some really impressive names. And on the business side, Stefan Abramo, I had my managers were Joe Gifford. It was just these guys that had been launching products, like these amazing products, really deep level. They had a great group structure. I went in there and was like, wow, I felt like I was a pretty capable guy. I got there and initially was pretty intimidated, but I found my way, and all of a sudden I found that, no, I'm good at some things too. I'm really good at organization. I'm really good at setting up a team and moving things forward and hitting my dates and having successes, organizing deep technical folks to complete a mission. And eventually moved into like managerial roles and group management, got to work on big global projects. So I got my perspective for diverse cultures and how to work with them expanded. I really loved it. And eventually I moved into bigger roles there in Evoqua. And of course, the company evolved a lot, and I got, started working with newer technologies, and I loved all those things. But what was clear is I loved my interactions with product management. I wanted to get in front of customers more often. It was occasional, but not enough. And I became a bit impatient, to be honest. I was in a good place, like a great organization. Snehal had arrived. It was really special to work with him, and amazing. But I got a little impatient, and when an opportunity with Nanostone came along for an application engineering role, it was like, well, this is a nice little balance. I can get in front of customers and get that interaction, but still rely on my technical expertise. So not too exposed, Took that on, really enjoyed it. And like I said, over time, I had the opportunity to start to meet with folks, like presented the board. So I got to meet Steve and started to meet Mike. And eventually Mike put me into the product management role. And it was like, yeah, this is my happy place. This is the place where I can have an influence on technology and innovation. I can have an influence on commercial strategy. I can work through what we talked about a bit earlier on getting that techno-economic value measurement going. I learned about it there essentially from that team, Mike in particular. That's really what kind of took me to where I was when I joined Aclarity. When Clarity first approached, it was a recruiting agency they were working with. They approached me initially. At first, the team that I was setting up wasn't quite right. And while I was really interested in the problem they were working on, and of course I had the electrochemical background that not everybody has, but I decided at that time I wasn't ready. So I gave them like some other names. You could talk to this person, you could talk to that person. If you don't find the right fit, contact me back in like 3 months. Well, 3 months go by, and of course I'd set these things up in a Nanostone and things were working well. And when Clarity came back, it was like, all right, I want to listen. So I heard about the situation and I thought, yeah, I think my tools, what I've learned, I think if I bring this to Aclarity, I'll help them avoid some pitfalls that I had already experienced myself. And so I thought I really had value to add, and the rest is history.
The avoidance of the landmines is much more important than the pursuit of the kind of shining uplands or whatever. And bringing that perspective is super helpful. That's really, really helpful context. So you're going from Evoqua into Nanostone into Aclarity. You're kind of unpacking the Russian dolls in terms of,
Yes.
of things.
I love that analogy.
Wonder what's nothing is next, Mike.
That's right.
Well, we're there for Aclarity for a very long time. Like going from big code to smaller code, were you attracted to the dynamics of smaller companies? Like, what did you learn about the various sizes of companies, your appraisal? Like, I'm just curious, like going through that sequence is interesting.
I've always been adventurous. I felt like it was a big move going to Nanostone from Evoqua, because when I joined Evoqua as Siemens Water Technologies, it had 400,000 employees worldwide, I think there were like 4 or 5 Michael Shaws in Siemens. We'd be trading emails all the time,
That is amazing.
I know, it was wild.
Oh my God, the Mike Shaw squad.
Yes. Eventually, we were Evoqua. And of course, what I found in a big company, it wasn't so clear at the time. We wanted to grow. We were focused on growth, but we were also really focused on our brand. And the brand at Evoqua is reliability, and now Xylem, their customers trust them and they value their customers' trust. And so they're very cautious to take a big risk. They need to protect their customers and the value that they bring. So growth is it's a different story there. What that does for innovation, though, at the time, and it's probably changed a lot since Sivan has taken over, at Xylem, their ecosystem. But at the time, it really throttled innovation. It wasn't so clear to me until I went to Nanostone. And when we started working through things, the pace was much faster. But even at Nanostone, where they were getting more mature and they had stable customers and had a stable business, it wasn't anything like it is at Aclarity, So the pace was faster, and then moving to Aclarity, much smaller. And now, we make decisions, we move forward, we take risks. For us, the biggest risk is running out of time. The pace has to be fast. The urgency has to be in place. I can realize that's maybe not for everybody, but I figured out along the way that that's the way I'm wired. I like to move fast. I'm not the person, if we've got an issue, I'm not the person that's like, well, let's see how it looks in a couple of days. Like, I want to let's dig into that. Let's start putting in some, what could come next, plan B, plan C. Let's be ready in case. It's always been my way. What I learned about myself in that journey was big companies are great. They have obviously a huge value in society. I want them to be my customers one day, but it's probably not the place for me. I like fast, urgent move, risk taking. And so I love that.
I've been wondering about this since you were talking earlier about the sort of your technical approaches. When you're in the business of producing a kind of a new product in response to a given problem, iteration is so important. Can you just talk a little bit about how literally just I'm in the lab with Mike and the team. What does the actual process of iteration and kind of moving towards the solution look like? I realize that's a large question and you can't sort of describe in sort of minute detail, Iteration is so important, and obviously continuous iteration and the opportunity to do things better the next time and the next time and the next time. I'm just really curious as to what that looks like with you and your technical team.
You've got to just get testing. You've got to form a hypothesis. You've got to test that hypothesis. You've got to extract the signals that you think you're looking for, and then quickly move, bigger and bigger and bigger, right? You start maybe with a synthetic water where you've got everything controlled and you're looking for the types of signals you need to see that gives you the answer to say, this is working, it's not working. When you're ready, you've got to get to that real water that has the real challenges and more unknowns. And then you've got to grow it, getting into the field. So you've got to take those chances to get out there is the first part. The second part is you have to be really critical of the answers that come back. It's so easy to have a hypothesis, think you see the answer that you were expecting to see, and say, yep, we got it. You've got to test your hypothesis. And what really helps, in my experience, is having a good, diverse team. You need pessimists on your team. You need people that aren't satisfied with light detail. They need to dig deep. You need optimists like me. You've got to have people that want to go out and test. If you left it just to the pessimists and the detailed people, it'd never leave the lab. But if you didn't have those people, you also might miss something you need to see to know this needs to be addressed, or this is an opportunity to get even better. I think that at a high level, you've got to take risks. You've got to get out there. You've got to get into the field. You've got to challenge yourself. But then on the other side, you've got to critically analyze the data you get and try to poke holes in your hypothesis constantly. We've gone through a form of that process. We're out in the field. We're getting these great results. We cannot be complacent. We have to wait, let's test for this now. Now let's check this. We've got to be sure that we're looking at all the angles, because you can go too fast and end up in the wrong spot. Similarly, as we talked about earlier with the Techno-Economic evaluation.
I just want to make sure people have really internalized that. It's very difficult on an audio.
My hands are moving.
To actually illustrate the difficulty is if you are going to a place and you are 20 degrees over a really long distance, even half a degree off, you end up in a very, very different place than the one that you imagined yourself. It's this idea of speed versus velocity. Velocity is really important to think about versus speed because velocity has a vector. The direction of travel really matters. And I think what you're describing is one of these things that is one of the most important foundational principles for anybody building a company, which is that you've got to understand the direction.
You've got to surround yourself with that diverse type of people. You need your pessimist, you need your optimist, you need your detail orientation, you need your big idea thinker. You have to have all those bases covered. If you don't have those bases covered, you're really setting yourself up, especially the pessimist. When you're looking for people to onboard, yes, you're looking for skills, experience, and backgrounds and so on. You're also looking for personality type. Back at Evoqua, I went through some leadership trainings and they had this DISC profile. So they had the DISC, and there's all different forms of that. They have really light versions too that can help you get a sense of, it won't be as detailed as DISC is. I would encourage folks to really take that approach to make sure you've got a well-rounded team, not only of skills and experience, but also work style diversity.
I couldn't agree more, even though I'm a dyed-in-the-wool optimist. And sometimes we've actually got a great balance at BIV. But in general, I think all of us are relatively optimistic, I think. But yeah, sometimes in my lesser moments, I'm I think everyone should be optimistic. We should all just go and do things. And obviously that doesn't work. So just to move us to your market, you're in the business of destroying PFAS, which is an ultra global problem. I mean, this is the way in which we described it when we were talking to our Fund 1 investors, is that we've literally done a reasonably effective job of poisoning the world. But this is turning up in places it really should not be turning up, in the oceans, in the ice, in all sorts of different places, not least concentrated in the human body. What do you want people to understand about the technical challenges of PFAS destruction?
At the end of the day, it's just a really useful suite of compounds. And what makes it so useful has made it ubiquitous. It's everywhere. What makes it so useful is how robust it is. So from a destruction standpoint, we all know it takes a special type of energy to be able to break that bond, and it makes it a real challenge.
Just say more about that bond.
Sure. The carbon-fluorine bond, it's one of the strongest chemical bonds there is. You won't degrade it with normal oxidants or normal processes. It requires a high energy to break that bond energy. And that's what makes there such limited options for destroying it. When I first came across PFAS way back in Evoqua, I wasn't really focused on it, but it was something I'd assume, oh yeah, you probably just hit it with some ozone. No, ozone doesn't have an oxidation potential high enough to even touch it. You will not degrade PFAS with ozone. You need a higher oxidation potential or other means, right? There's also thermal energy and another. So it's very challenging to destroy. The other thing that makes it so challenging is the places where we're going after it, it's in really small concentrations. It's not easy to get at something very efficiently. You need a very high energy process to go after a very small concentration. Take leachate, for example. Leachate is one of the highest concentrations of, wastewaters with PFAS in it. And the PFAS might be 50 ppb. Meanwhile, there's 10,000 ppm of TOC, and it's like, it's this little tiny needle in this haystack you're going after.
Defined it first. Yeah.
So really what that means is, to us, is that there's a lot of innovation in your destruction engine. We have focused on that. We focus on efficiencies. We focus on how to efficiently mineralize this compound. But the other piece is how do you build economic optimized process trains that can allow you to efficiently target it and destroy it in an economically viable way? And that's where, again, I hate to keep on using this phrase over and over again, but it's a real feature of what we do is we do this techno-economic modeling. We're looking at different problems, we're assembling trains, and we're measuring the holistic techno-economic value to find this is the optimized approach for the customer. Especially, I know things are changing. We may talk about it in a moment. For a while, regulations were such that either they weren't going to do anything because they didn't need to, or they were going to start to do something, but they're going to use this as a cost that they added to a business when you're trying to remove this from your wastewater. There's no revenue to be had or cost savings to be had from implementing PFAS treatment in some of these places, like a landfill. So you've got to evaluate it from a cost perspective in order to make sure that your customers can add this on and remain successful. And so that innovation around the destruction engine is only one piece. It's also finding the right process train to make sure that you're doing this in an efficient way as possible.
I think it would be really helpful insight. Just take us into the mind of the customer. You've obviously got your first commercial deployments out there and in process. It's really awesome. But take a little time to tell us about how your customers are thinking. How are people who are out there, who are in charge of, relatively high concentrations of PFAS in landfill leachate or wherever it might turn up after the post-isolation stage, whether that's ion exchange or GAC or whatever it might be, some reusable media. How are they thinking about this? What do their incentive structures look like? Why are the early movers moving? What have you learned on that side?
The customers that we speak to, they all want to do something about this, and nobody wants to send pollution out of their plant. So everybody's looking at this and trying to find the way, how can we make this work? How can we get this done? Now they also know that regulations are coming and they know they will have to. And so we see a lot of folks that are doing it for the right reasons. They're taking the first steps. It's not fully clear on exactly what they're going to have to do. And so what they're looking at is testing different processes and looking to meet what they think their public will need, whether it be through regulation or their local communities, and trying to find the ways to do it in as economical way as possible. So for example, if you think about a landfill, we've seen several landfills that have taken that first step and they put in something like foam fractionation. So now they're taking it out of the water. Great. They're concentrating it into this concentrate. Okay, what to do now? For a while, of course, destruction companies have been circling and here's an opportunity for us. But at the end of the day, for a long time, the most cost-effective thing to do was to get it into some form where you could package it and put it right back in the landfill. And you get it, what they have to focus on is what leaves the plant via leachate. No one's telling them they can't put it back in the landfill. So at the end of the day, that's my competition. My competition isn't SQO or incineration or all these other things. That's my competition. You must know that first. And then you must design your treatment to see if you can compete with that. From our perspective, we've done our analysis, we've done our work, and we've done our solutioning. We could compete directly with that. So now I can offer that customer, I know you want to do the right thing. I know you want to eliminate this from the face of the earth. Let me give you the option to do that.
You're picking up on the kind of the nexus of competition. It's such a brilliant thing to hear. This idea that, You actually know whenever anybody says to us, like, we don't have any competition, it's just sort of like, excuse me while I throw my laptop out the window. The status quo, right? Everybody has competition, and that's exactly what's happening at the moment. But going into that degree of granularity of knowing exactly what you're competing against is such an important part of the puzzle. That's super helpful. So if you zoom out, obviously when we were expecting regs to come in mid 2022, we invested in Aclarity in Q1 of 2022. We were expecting those regs to come in. Those regs took a little while. Obviously now there's a change in kind of administration in terms of the attitude to a lot of things, but kind of emerging contaminants definitely being one of them. Who knows? Maybe the Kennedy in charge of stuff might be interested in this. We'll see what happens over the next couple of years. Where do you think the market is at the moment? How would you characterize it for people on the outside looking in? Because I feel the confusion out there, which is people like, know that PFAS is a terrible thing, and then it hasn't really materialized yet in the way that a lot of people, including ourselves, we thought it would in terms of being a kind of a commercial driver. So where is the market at the moment?
It is progressing ever so slowly. I started looking at this probably in the early 2020s or so. I remember at that time they had put in monitoring, which, that's not a part of the regulatory process. First you got to measure what's out there to know what to set rules to. So we knew something was going to happen at that time. A really big milestone that I recall, though, I think it was like 2023, the settlements of the 3M and DuPont.
Absolutely.
Huge. Billions of dollars are now going to be earmarked for solving this issue. And then, of course, in 2024, toward the end of the Biden administration, the EPA launched rules around drinking water limits, as well as a CERCLA designation. And there was that question when the Trump administration came in, is that going to change? But what's interesting about PFAS, there's not many, but it's one of the few bipartisan issues in US politics. From our side, there's been a tweak to what is regulated for sure, and maybe a little change in the dates and for compliance, but not a huge change. They're also bringing this, so we can see movement. Of course, there's a lot of movement on the drinking water side. We know that. But we're also seeing on the wastewater side, I think part of it is because they know compliance is coming. And the other part is now money is flowing. A lot of these communities didn't have money to do something they know they wanted to do. Now they've got dollars flowing from these settlement cases, which really only started toward the end of 2025. So from our side, for a long time, we were having discussions. We knew this was going to happen, but it felt a lot like we were pushing. And now the inbound and the discussions we're having with engineering firms, we're feeling the pull, which is a great signal. Yeah, I know it's probably not the first time you heard this, but I do think we're getting it started. It's moving. Now is a great time to be offering solutions in this space.
Well, the comforting thing is it's inevitable, and you don't want to be too late to a market. Very difficult to be right on time. And so your option that you have is to be a little bit early and get yourself ready and set for when the market moves your way. I'm also curious, as people look out, obviously people throw around, God knows, is one of those things that Chris Gasson at GWI gets very upset about, which is that the numbers being thrown around about remediation of PFAS would outweigh all of the capital expenditure on utilities likely for the next 10 years or whatever it is. These are very, very big numbers you can throw around about the need to remediate PFAS. But if you were to sort of set up Mystic Mike with your crystal ball, how do you think the next kind of, let's call it 3 to 5 years, are going to develop in let's just say the US and Europe? How do you think this is going to play out?
I see a general progression already. I can see adoption. You think about this PFAS problem. We don't want it in our drinking water. So let's say our drinking water, right? Let's say our drinking water is a river and we're pulling river water in and it has 20 ppt of PFOA. And so we're putting in huge GAC systems because the flow rate's high. It's millions of gallons per day. So we're chasing this super tiny concentration to meet the limit. Upstream of that river is a wastewater treatment plant. And in there is thousands of ppt flowing, because that wastewater treatment plant is receiving all these waters from different places, and they don't really do any PFAS removal. So it goes through their system. There's dilution, so maybe it's hundreds or thousands. Upstream of that, though, is usually 1, 2, 3, industrial wastewaters that have higher concentrations, but very small flow rates. So, it's natural. It's not my idea. Everybody is focused on this. Go find it at the source and choke it there. Stop the flow. And I see a lot of traction with these settlement funds. These wastewater treatment plants are saying, no mas, we're not going to take it anymore. And so landfills or industrial dischargers need to find solutions. And that's the right place to go and get it. So I see the market expanding widely there. In terms of like groundwater remediation, it's tricky. I think it's really going to come down to what is the risk of it getting out of bounds, so to speak. I don't know, as to Christopher's point, I don't know if we're going to go and spend those trillions of dollars to go remediate every aquifer across the world, but we're definitely going to do it if it's encroaching drinking water supplies for communities.
As it exits the groundwater into the drinking water supply, for sure.
I think it's going to move, both US and Europe. And from my understanding, I haven't been diving into the European market. We've been trying to be really laser focused locally first, but we do have ambitions to go there. I know there was a real emphasis early on in eliminating PFAS from product streams, so it doesn't make it into landfills anymore, and which I think is a great approach. I love that they're doing that. But my understanding is that the treatment and remediation is maybe a couple of years behind us here in the US, because that was what our emphasis was. And so it'll be fascinating to go from our perspective, focus on our solution here and start to evaluate what are the problems over there, and then do that solution engineering we talked about. How can we find a way to solve problems efficiently over there too?
It's certainly going to be interesting to watch. Mike, you want to get this? This is great. I mean, it really is. It's so awesome to have you at the helms of what we think is going to be a very, very important company in solving a really enormous challenge for the entire world. You strike me as somebody that learns very effectively. And it sounds that you're a big kind of learner via observation, that you've because the way in which you name check people that you've worked alongside of, obviously people that I'm privileged to know as well. As you move into this role, how do you think about kind of growing as a company leader? I mean, are you a podcast person? Do you read? Is there anything else that you would kind of recommend to other people? I mean, present podcasts excluded, of course.
This is definitely high on my list, especially because it's just so relevant to me. When it comes to learning, I'm just very eclectic in my interests. I do spend time trying to learn how to grow as a leader. And this show I love How I Built This is another great one. You've heard that before. But then I'll like things like the Tim Ferriss show, and I might nerd out on some sort of fitness regime or something, as well as how to build a company. So yeah, I'm pretty eclectic. I've got a long commute. I don't do it every day. I go through various things. So I'm usually having portions of my drive where I'm listening to English football analysis, and then I'm listening to How I Built This or Fundamental Molecule or Marketplace. When it comes to reading, similarly, I might just spend a lot of time reading history, which sometimes actually you can find parallels there too. From leadership books, I don't really usually gravitate toward, the self-help section in bookstores or libraries. I like more people's stories. I'll name check somebody with I love Leading by Sir Alex Ferguson, how he led, that team and the parallels.
I mean, he was a Man United manager, so not my favorite person.
I understand that.
But I did he was a guest in a class at graduate school. I asked him a question. He looked down at my nameplate and he said, Ferguson. And then he asked me if I was a sheep stealer.
Well, that's probably where he came from, right?
Which I wasn't. But yeah, he's from Boston, Glasgow. So we're part of the same.
So that book, I think, is based on those classes, actually.
Yeah. He worked with my old professor, who is really, really cool. It is a great book. My question to him was whether or not he was lucky. Was from an Arsenal fan. And he actually to his credit, he said, at crucial junctures that he was. I don't want to go into too far, but in the Champions League final, which they won.
Yes, of course.
In 1999, the opposing team took off a key midfielder he still doesn't know why. And it allowed them to lay the base. And he's great. Really, really interesting self-facing back. But yeah, I actually think you're right. Reading history is a really good idea because the same sort of lessons tend to come out, but without having kind of you beaten around the head for 200 pages on something that should have been a blog post.
Exactly. Another book, I wouldn't have thought of until I heard it. I was on the Tim Ferriss show and then I looked into it, was this book called Extreme Ownership by this guy called Jocko Willink.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man. I mean, so many parallels. And I find myself even sometimes using the terminology as if, a military captain or something is. so much comes from that book. And it just, all these things, they go across, any industry, you can put in practice that. And so it's just interesting to find lessons from places you wouldn't expect other than self-help sections in bookstores and so on.
No, for sure. And it's so fun when you find it, isn't it?
Yes.
When you find stuff that you know is going to stick.
Correct.
It's fantastic. Mike, this is such a pleasure. It's been really great to get to know you over the last couple of years. We were very lucky that headhunter found you and that everyone else was rubbish by comparison, so they came back 3 months later. It's been such a pleasure to watch you work. And this was exactly as interesting as I expected it. Your reflections on moving through your career, but obviously into the leadership role at Aclarity. And thank you so much for all of your work. We have a final question that we ask all of our guests on the fundamental molecule, which is, if you had to choose one piece of advice for current and future water entrepreneurs, what would it be?
Well, I had one in mind and I heard Steve say it, so now I had to change.
Happens to me all the time. It's really annoying.
He's too fast. But actually, I thought of something else, and it's something that we touched on earlier. Constantly second guess yourself. Constantly test your hypothesis. And I don't mean slow yourself down. You must get out there. You must take risks, but never just trust that you got it right the first or second or third time. Just constantly be critical of yourself. Now, you may not be able to do that yourself if you're an optimist like me. So surround yourself with people that will. I think that's the key piece. Make sure you've got what you think you've got and continually do it. Don't get complacent.
Yeah, it comes back to a really, really important theme of this conversation, which is strong foundation.
That's right.
Mike, this has been wonderful. We'll speak to you soon, all right?
Thank you very much.
Cheers, sir.